I inherited my uncle's hunting lodge in October, and the silence was the first thing that felt wrong. Not peaceful silence, but the kind that presses against your eardrums like water pressure. Like the forest was holding its breath. Drop a comment and tell me if you've ever stayed somewhere that felt like it was watching you back. I want to know I'm not alone in this. My name is Colin Vreeland, and I was 28 when my uncle left me his hunting lodge in northern Idaho. I hadn't seen him in 15 years, hadn't even known he was sick until the lawyer called to say he'd passed and left me the property in his will. The drive up took 6 hours from Boise, the last 40 minutes on a dirt road that wound through lodgepole pines so thick they blocked out the afternoon sun. The lodge appeared suddenly around a bend, a 2-story structure built from dark timber with a stone chimney and a covered porch that wrapped around the front. It looked solid, well-maintained, but there was something about the way it sat in the clearing that made me uneasy, like it had grown there instead of being built. I parked and stood for a moment listening. No birds, no wind, just that heavy silence pressing down. Inside, the air smelled like old smoke and leather. The main room was large, with exposed beams and a stone fireplace big enough to stand in. Mounted heads lined the walls: elk, mule deer, a black bear with its mouth frozen in a snarl. Their glass eyes caught the light from the windows, following me as I moved through the space. I'd planned to stay one night, take inventory, and head back to the city to figure out what to do with the place. Sell it, probably. I had a life in Boise, a job managing a sporting goods store, a girlfriend who was already annoyed I'd driven up here alone. But as I unpacked my duffel bag in the upstairs bedroom, I found a note tucked under the lamp on the nightstand. My uncle's handwriting, shaky but legible. Colin, if you're reading this, I'm gone and you've made the mistake of coming here. There's something you need to know about this place. The mounted heads aren't decoration. They're witnesses. Whatever you do, don't let them see you alone after midnight. And don't ever, ever turn your back on the elk. I read it twice, then laughed. It had to be a joke. My uncle had always been eccentric, a loner who'd spent decades in the backcountry, but this felt like the kind of thing you'd write to mess with someone. Still, I glanced at the doorway, suddenly aware of how isolated I was. The sun was already sinking behind the trees, painting the clearing in shades of orange and shadow. I went downstairs and started a fire in the hearth, more for comfort than warmth. The flames caught quickly, crackling and spitting sparks. I made dinner from the canned goods I'd brought, ate standing at the kitchen counter, and tried not to look at the mounted heads. But I could feel them. Every time I turned my back, the sensation of being watched intensified. By 10 o'clock, I was exhausted. I locked the doors, checked the windows, and headed upstairs to the bedroom. I left the hallway light on, telling myself it was just practical. Easier to navigate if I needed to use the bathroom. I was asleep within minutes. The sound woke me at 12:17 a.m., a soft, rhythmic creaking, like footsteps on old floorboards, coming from downstairs. I sat up, heart already racing. The hallway light was still on, spilling a faint glow under my door. I listened, holding my breath. The creaking continued, slow, deliberate, moving through the main room. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, then eased the bedroom door open. The hallway was empty. Below, the main room was dark, except for the dying embers in the fireplace. The creaking stopped. I stood at the top of the stairs, debating. Go down and investigate, or lock myself in the bedroom and wait for morning. Then I heard it. A soft clicking sound, like wood tapping against wood. Rhythmic, persistent. It was coming from the main room. I descended the stairs slowly, keeping the phone light aimed ahead of me. The beams swept across the furniture, the dark windows, the mounted heads on the walls. They were all facing me, every single one. The elk, the deer, the bear. All turned toward the stairs. glass eyes fixed on my position. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. They hadn't been facing this way before. I was sure of it. When I'd gone upstairs, they'd been angled toward the fireplace, toward the windows, not toward the stairs. The clicking sound came again, louder now. I swung the light toward the source and my stomach dropped. The elk head above the fireplace was moving. Not swaying like it was loose on its mount. Moving deliberately. Its massive antlers tilted left, then right, the wood plaque groaning softly with each shift. I should have run. Every instinct screamed at me to get out, to grab my keys and leave. But I couldn't move. I was locked in place, watching as the elk's head rotated slowly, impossibly, until it was facing away from me, toward the window. And then I saw what it was looking at. There was someone standing outside, just beyond the glass, a shape tall and hunched, barely visible in the darkness. It stood perfectly still, hands pressed against the window, breath fogging the pane. The clicking sound came from its fingers, tapping against the glass in that same slow rhythm. I stumbled backward, my phone slipping from my hand. The light hit the floor, casting wild shadows across the walls. The shape outside moved, tracking my position through the window. Then it smiled. I couldn't see details, but I saw the movement, the widening of something that might have been a mouth. The clicking stopped. The elk's head rotated again, turning back toward me with a grinding creak. And in the dim light from my phone, I saw that its glass eyes had changed. They weren't reflecting light anymore. They were dark, deep, like they were looking through me instead of at me. I grabbed my phone and ran upstairs, slamming the bedroom door and shoving a chair under the handle. I sat on the bed, trembling, staring at the door and waiting for footsteps, for the handle to turn, for something to come crashing through. Nothing did. The lodge fell silent again, that same oppressive, listening silence. I didn't sleep. I sat with my back against the headboard, phone clutched in my hand, and watched the door until the first gray light of dawn crept through the window. When the sun was fully up, I went downstairs. The mounted heads were all facing forward again, exactly as they'd been when I first arrived. The elk above the fireplace was angled slightly left, toward the window, in a position that looked natural, permanent. The window showed no handprints, no fog, no sign that anyone had been there. I checked outside. The ground beneath the window was undisturbed, a carpet of pine needles and dry leaves with no footprints, no disturbance. I should have left then, should have packed my things and never looked back. Instead, I found myself standing in the main room, staring up at the elk, thinking about my uncle's note. Don't ever turn your back on the elk. And I understood. The elk wasn't the threat. It was the warning. It had been trying to show me what was outside, what was watching, what had been watching this place long before my uncle, long before the lodge was built. I left that morning, but I didn't sell the property. I couldn't, because now I understand what my uncle understood. Some places don't let you go once they've seen you. They just wait, patient and still, for you to come back. And late at night, when I'm alone in my apartment in Boise, I still feel it. That sensation of being watched, of glass eyes turning toward me in the darkness. The lodge is still there, waiting in the silence. And someday, I know I'll go back, not because I want to, but because it's already decided I will. My name is Aubrey Chen, and I made the mistake of thinking a hunting lodge would be a quiet place to finish my thesis. I was 24, burned out from 3 years of graduate work in environmental science, and desperate for somewhere cheap and isolated where I could focus. When my roommate's brother mentioned his family's old hunting camp in western Montana was sitting empty, I jumped at the chance. 2 months of solitude, no rent, just me and my laptop, and the kind of silence you can't find in Seattle. He gave me the keys, and a warning I didn't take seriously enough. "Stay out of the skinning shed," he said. "It's not safe. Floors rotted through in places." The lodge itself was smaller than I'd expected. A single-story cabin with a main room, a tiny kitchen, and 2 bedrooms that smelled like mothballs and old quilts. But it was clean enough, and the propane stove worked, and the view from the porch was exactly what I'd needed. Acres of forest stretching toward mountains that turned purple at sunset. The skinning shed sat about 50 yards from the main cabin, partially hidden by a stand of aspens. It was a rough structure, built from weathered planks, with gaps between the boards where you could see darkness inside. The door hung crooked on rusted hinges, swaying slightly in the breeze. I avoided it for the first 3 days. Unpacked my things, set up my workspace at the kitchen table, fell into a routine of coffee at dawn, writing until my eyes blurred, and long walks through the forest in the afternoon. The silence was perfect at first, exactly what I'd wanted. But on the 4th night, I heard something. I was working late, the only light coming from my laptop screen and a small lamp on the table. Outside, the forest was black and still. Then came a sound, dragging, something heavy being pulled across gravel. I looked up, listening. The sound came from the direction of the skinning shed. Slow, deliberate, scraping along the ground. I stood and moved to the window, pressing my face close to the glass. The shed was barely visible in the darkness, just a vague shape among the trees. I couldn't see movement, but the dragging sound continued for another 30 seconds, then stopped. Probably an animal, I told myself, a deer carcass being moved by a scavenger. I went back to my laptop, but I couldn't focus. The silence felt different now, heavier. The next morning, I walked out to the shed. Told myself I was just checking, being thorough, making sure no bears or coyotes were getting too comfortable near the cabin. The door was open wider than it had been before. Not much, just a few inches, but enough to notice. I pushed it the rest of the way and looked inside. The interior was dim, lit only by sunlight filtering through the gaps in the walls. There was a workbench along one side, stained dark with old blood. Hooks hung from the ceiling beams, rusted and empty. The floor was dirt and old sawdust, disturbed in places like something had been dragged through recently. In the far corner, I saw boot prints, fresh ones, pressed into the dirt floor in a pattern that suggested someone had stood there for a long time, facing the door. My chest tightened. I backed out quickly, telling myself it was probably the property owner checking on things. Except nobody had mentioned coming by, and there were no tire tracks on the access road. I closed the shed door, as much as it would close, and wedged a stick through the handle to keep it from swinging open. That night, the dragging sound came again. Same time, same direction, but this time it was closer, right outside the cabin. I turned off my lamp and sat in the darkness listening. The dragging moved around the perimeter of the cabin, slow and methodical, like something was circling. I heard it pass beneath the kitchen window, then the bedroom window, then around the back toward the bathroom. Then it stopped at the front door. I sat frozen at the table, barely breathing. The door was locked. I'd checked it 3 times. A soft knock, 3 taps, evenly spaced. I didn't answer. The knock came again, then a voice, muffled but clear. "I saw you today." Male, flat, no emotion. "You came to the shed." I clamped my hands over my mouth to keep from making a sound. "You shouldn't have done that." The dragging sound resumed, moving away from the door, back toward the direction of the shed. I waited until I couldn't hear it anymore, then grabbed my phone. No signal. I'd known that before I came. The nearest cell tower was 20 miles south. I spent the rest of the night sitting in the corner of the main room with a kitchen knife in my lap, watching the door and the windows until dawn. When the sun came up, I went outside. There were marks in the dirt, long furrows, like something with multiple points had been dragged along the ground. They led from the cabin to the shed in a weaving, uneven path. I should have left, should have packed my car and driven straight back to Seattle. Instead, I went to the shed again. The stick I'd wedged through the handle was on the ground, snapped in half. The door stood wide open. Inside, the boot prints were gone. The dirt floor had been smoothed over, raked clean. But there was something new hanging from one of the ceiling hooks. A piece of fabric. Dark, stained. I stepped closer, my heart pounding. It was a sleeve. From a jacket. Torn off at the shoulder, the edges ragged like it had been ripped rather than cut. And pinned to it with a rusted nail was a Polaroid photograph. I reached up with shaking hands and took it down. The photo showed the cabin. My cabin, taken at night, through the kitchen window. And inside, sitting at the table in the lamplight, I could see myself, working on my laptop, unaware. The photo had been taken last night. I dropped it and ran. I threw my things into my car, didn't bother with half my belongings, just grabbed my laptop and my keys and drove. I didn't stop until I hit the highway. Didn't feel safe until I saw the lights of Missoula in the distance. I called my roommate's brother from a gas station, told him what happened, about the sounds, the voice, the photograph. He was quiet for a long time. My dad used to say someone lived out there, he said finally, back in the woods. Said they'd come around sometimes during hunting season, watching from the trees. He thought it was just a drifter, someone camping illegally. But after my uncle disappeared in '98, we stopped going up there as much. Disappeared? Went out tracking elk one morning, never came back. They found his jacket about a mile from the lodge. Just the jacket, nothing else. I felt cold all over. What did the jacket look like? I asked. He described it. A brown canvas work jacket with reinforced shoulders. The same jacket I'd seen hanging in the shed. I never went back, never finished my thesis that summer. Spent weeks jumping at shadows, checking locks obsessively, unable to shake the feeling that I was being watched. 2 months later, I got a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a Polaroid photograph. It showed my apartment building, taken from across the street, at night. And in the window of my unit, on the 3rd floor, I could see a figure, sitting at a table, working on a laptop. I moved the next day, changed my number, told myself it was paranoia, that someone was just messing with me. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear it. That dragging sound, slow and deliberate, circling just outside my awareness. And I wonder if leaving the lodge was ever really an option, or if something followed me home, patient and quiet, waiting for me to let my guard down. The skinning shed is still there, I'm sure, door hanging open, hooks waiting. And somewhere in the darkness, someone is watching, taking photographs, learning, deciding when to knock again. My name is Marcus Webb, and I was 31 when I booked 3 nights at the Clearwater Hunting Lodge through an online rental site. It was exactly what I needed after the divorce. Remote, cheap, and far enough from Portland that nobody would think to look for me there. The listing described it as a rustic retreat for the serious outdoorsman, with photos showing a modest log structure surrounded by spruce trees somewhere in the Oregon Cascades. The host's name was listed as R. Torrance, and the reviews were mostly positive, though sparse. Quiet, one said. Peaceful, said another. A third simply read, exactly as described, would not return. That last one should have been a warning. I arrived on a Thursday afternoon in late November, the sky already threatening snow. The access road was rough, forcing me to take my sedan up a steep track that probably hadn't seen maintenance in years. The lodge appeared at the end of a long clearing, smaller than the photos suggested, with a sagging porch and windows that reflected the gray sky like empty eyes. The lockbox was where the host said it would be, hanging from a nail beside the door. Inside was a single key attached to a wooden tag carved with the number 3. The interior smelled like old pine and something else, something faintly sweet and organic that I couldn't quite place. The main room was narrow, dominated by a wood stove in the center and a few pieces of mismatched furniture. The walls were bare, except for a single shelf holding a row of old paperbacks with faded covers. And on a small table near the door sat a leather-bound guest book. I dropped my duffel on the couch and flipped it open, curious. The first entry was dated 1987, written in careful script. Excellent hunting. Saw a 12-point buck on the ridge. Will return next season. Monsieur Patterson. I paged through slowly, dozens of entries spanning decades. Most were brief notes about the weather, the hunting, the solitude. But as I read deeper, I noticed a pattern. Every few pages there was an entry that was different, longer, more detailed, and always ending the same way. October 15th, 1991. Stayed 3 nights. Heard something walking around the cabin after dark. Couldn't see what it was, but it stopped at each window like it was checking. Left a day early. J. Hendricks. June 3rd, 1998. Beautiful area, but something's wrong with the back bedroom. The door won't stay closed. Kept opening during the night, even after I wedged a chair under the handle. Found muddy footprints on the floor in the morning. Did not sleep the last night. A. Torres. November 22nd, 2003. Heard my brother's voice calling from the woods. My brother died in 2001. K. Voss. I closed the book, unease settling in my stomach. These had to be jokes, ghost story additions for atmosphere, the kind of thing bored hunters wrote to entertain themselves. But the handwriting was different in each entry. The dates spanned decades, and the tone was wrong. Too flat, too matter-of-fact. I made dinner from the canned soup I'd brought and tried to ignore the book sitting on the table. Outside, the light faded quickly, swallowed by the trees. By 6 o'clock, it was fully dark. I lit the wood stove and settled on the couch with a book, telling myself the isolation was exactly what I'd wanted. No phone signal, no internet, no distractions. Just silence and time to think. Around 9 o'clock, I heard the first footstep. It came from the back bedroom. A single creak of floorboards, distinct and deliberate. I lowered my book and listened. Nothing. Just the soft pop and hiss of the fire in the stove. Then another step, closer to the bedroom door. I stood slowly, my pulse quickening. The cabin was small enough that I could see the bedroom doorway from where I stood. It was closed. I hadn't been in there yet, had planned to sleep on the couch rather than bother with the musty bedroom. The door was old, wooden, with a tarnished brass knob. As I watched, the knob turned slowly to the right. The door swung open 6 inches. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The darkness beyond the doorway was absolute, thicker than it should have been. Then I heard it, a soft exhalation, like someone releasing a held breath. The door swung shut again with a soft click. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, my hands shaking. I crossed the room in 4 quick steps and yanked the bedroom door open. Empty. A narrow room with a single bed, a dresser, and a window looking out into the trees. No one inside. Nowhere to hide. But the window was open. Just a crack, maybe 2 inches. Cold air poured through, and the curtains swayed gently, despite the fact that there was no wind outside. I hadn't opened that window. I was sure of it. I hadn't even been in this room. I closed it quickly, checking the latch. It stuck when I tried to lock it, the mechanism old and stiff. I forced it into place and backed out of the room, pulling the door shut behind me. For the next hour, I sat on the couch with the flashlight in my lap, listening. The stove burned down to embers. The cabin settled and creaked around me, but the bedroom door stayed closed. At 11, exhausted, I decided to check the guest book again. I needed to see those entries to confirm I hadn't imagined the pattern. I opened it to a random page near the middle, an entry from 2007. The back bedroom window won't stay closed. Something keeps opening it. I watched from the main room tonight and saw the latch turn by itself. Left at dawn. P. Ruiz. My throat went dry. I flipped forward looking for more. March 17th, 2012. Do not sleep in the back bedroom. I woke up at 3 a.m. to find someone standing at the foot of the bed. Tall, thin, wearing dark clothes. I turned on my flashlight and it was gone, but I could still hear breathing. I spent the rest of the night in my car. D. Marshall. I kept reading, my hands trembling. August 9th, 2015. It knows your name. I heard mine called from outside 3 times during the night. The voice was familiar, but I couldn't place it. In the morning, I found my name written in the frost on the bedroom window. From the inside. L. Kim. The most recent entry was dated 2 weeks ago, November 10th, second night. The guest book is a record. Everyone who stays here adds to it. We're feeding it information. Our names, our fears, our experiences. It learns from what we write. Don't add to it. Don't tell it anything. I'm leaving now. Anonymous. I set the book down carefully, my heart pounding. The cabin felt smaller suddenly. The darkness beyond the windows pressed closer. A soft scraping sound came from the bedroom. The window sliding open again. I stood and walked to the door, phone in hand. I was leaving, right now. I'd sleep in my car if I had to. But when I reached for the doorknob, I saw something that stopped me cold. The guest book was open again. To the last page, a new entry had appeared, written in handwriting I didn't recognize. November 28th. Marcus Webb checked in today. He found the warnings but didn't leave. He's reading this now, standing by the front door, wondering if it's real. I stared at the words, my vision tunneling. I hadn't written that. The handwriting wasn't mine. He's going to turn around now and look at the bedroom door. I couldn't help it. I turned. The bedroom door was open again, wide open this time, and in the darkness beyond I saw a shape, tall, narrow, standing just inside the threshold, not moving, just watching. I ran. I hit the front door hard, fumbling with the lock, my hands slipping on the cold metal. Behind me I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate, crossing the main room. The lock finally gave and I burst outside into the freezing night. I didn't look back, just ran to my car, threw myself inside and started the engine. As I reversed down the driveway, headlights sweeping across the cabin, I saw it. The bedroom window was open again, and pressed against the glass from inside was a hand. Long fingers splayed wide. Too many joints. It stayed there until the trees swallowed the cabin from view. I drove through the night, didn't stop until I reached a gas station 50 miles south. I called the rental host from a payphone, demanded to know what the hell was going on. The number was disconnected. I checked the listing when I got home. It was gone, deleted. No record of Clearwater Hunting Lodge anywhere on the site. But 3 days later, I received a package. No return address. Inside was the guest book. I haven't opened it. It sits in my closet now, wrapped in a plastic bag, sealed with tape. Sometimes I hear pages turning, late at night, the soft rustle of paper. And I know if I opened it, I'd find new entries. People who stayed after me, people who ignored the warnings and wrote their names and their fears into that book, feeding whatever lives in the back bedroom, whatever watches from the darkness and learns from what we leave behind. I think about burning it, but I'm afraid that wouldn't help, that it would just appear somewhere else, in another lodge, with another host, waiting for the next person who thinks isolation is what they need. The next person who doesn't realize some places keep records. And once you're in the book, you're part of the story. Forever. My name is Teresa Polk, and I spent 4 days working as a cook at the Ridgeline Hunting Lodge in northern Alberta. It was supposed to be a 2-week contract. I needed the money. Catering jobs in Calgary had dried up after the restaurant I worked at closed, and my savings were nearly gone. When the agency called with a remote position, decent pay, room and board included, I said yes without asking enough questions. The lodge catered to guided hunting trips, groups of men who'd fly in for a week to track moose and elk in the backcountry. My job was simple: prepare 3 meals a day, keep the kitchen clean, stay out of the way. The head guide, a man named Dale, picked me up from the float plane dock on a gray Monday morning. He was in his 50s, weathered and quiet, with the kind of face that looked permanently sunburned. "You ever worked at a camp like this before?" he asked as we loaded my bags into his truck. "Hotels, mostly," I said. "Some catering. How many guests?" "6 this week. They're out on the land now with the other guides. You'll meet them at dinner." The drive took 40 minutes on a logging road that cut through dense forest. The lodge appeared suddenly, a large 2-story building with a green metal roof and a wide deck overlooking a lake. Smaller outbuildings dotted the property: storage sheds, a generator house, a garage. And at the edge of the clearing, half hidden by birch trees, was a small cabin with darkened windows. "What's that?" I asked, pointing. Dale glanced over, his expression tightening. "Waiting room. Don't go in there." "Waiting room for what?" "Just don't." He didn't say anything else. The lodge kitchen was commercial grade, well stocked, with propane appliances and a walk-in cooler that hummed constantly. My quarters were upstairs, a narrow room with a single bed and a window overlooking the forest. I spent the afternoon prepping dinner: roast venison, mashed potatoes, vegetables. The guests arrived around 6, muddy and exhausted, smelling like sweat and gun oil. They barely acknowledged me, just sat at the long table in the dining hall and ate in silence while Dale poured whiskey. I cleaned the kitchen and went to bed early, lulled to sleep by the generator's steady drone. The sound woke me just after 2 in the morning. A door slamming, once, twice, 3 times, hard enough to rattle the walls. I sat up, disoriented. The lodge was dark except for a faint glow from the emergency lights in the hallway. Below, I heard raised voices, arguing. I pulled on my jacket and crept downstairs. Dale and 2 of the guides were standing in the main room, dressed in layers despite the cold, flashlights in hand. One of them was holding a rifle. "Can't just leave him out there," the younger guide was saying. "We're not going back tonight," Dale said firmly. "We'll look at first light." "What happened?" I asked. They all turned to look at me. Dale's face was drawn, older in the harsh light. "One of the guests wandered off," he said. "Miller. Probably just got turned around. Happens sometimes." "In the dark?" "He was drunk," the younger guide said. "We told him to stay in his cabin, but he wanted to see the lake." Dale shot him a look, and the guide fell silent. "Go back to bed," Dale said to me. "Nothing you can do." But I stayed in the doorway, watching as they grabbed coats and radios and headed outside. Through the window, I saw their flashlight beams cutting through the darkness, sweeping the tree line. They returned an hour later, empty-handed. The next morning I made breakfast while the guides and remaining guests prepared to search. The mood was tense, subdued. Nobody spoke much. I watched from the kitchen window as they spread out across the property, moving methodically through the forest. Dale stayed behind, coordinating on the radio from the deck. Around noon, I saw something that made me pause. The door to the small cabin, the waiting room, was open, just slightly, a gap of maybe 6 inches. I hadn't seen anyone go near it. I walked outside, wiping my hands on my apron. Dale was inside the lodge, back to the window. I crossed the clearing toward the cabin, telling myself I was just closing the door, being helpful. The closer I got, the colder the air became. My breath misted white, and frost clung to the grass even though the afternoon sun was warm. I reached the door and pushed it open the rest of the way. Inside was a single room, dim and bare. No furniture, no decorations. Just 4 walls, a plank floor, and a window on the far side looking out toward the lake. And in the center of the floor, facing the door, was a pair of boots. Muddy hiking boots, still laced, positioned as if someone had been standing in them and simply stepped out. My chest tightened. I recognized them. Miller had been wearing those boots at dinner. I backed out quickly and found Dale on the deck. "The waiting room," I said, my voice shaking. "There are boots inside, Miller's boots." Dale's face went pale. He set down his radio and walked past me without a word, moving fast toward the cabin. I followed. He stopped in the doorway and stared at the boots for a long time. Then he pulled the door shut and turned to me. "You didn't see anything," he said quietly. "Understand? What is this place?" "It's where they wait," he said. "The ones who don't come back." I stared at him, uncomprehending. "Every few years, someone wanders off," Dale continued, his voice flat. "We search, we call it in. Usually we find them, but sometimes we don't. And when we don't, their things show up in there." He nodded toward the cabin. Boots, jackets, hats, whatever they were wearing, always arranged like they just stepped out of them. "That's impossible." "You saw the boots. Where's Miller?" Dale looked past me toward the forest. "Out there, somewhere, or nowhere. I don't know. We have to call someone, the police, search and rescue." "Already did. They'll be here tomorrow, but they won't find anything." His voice was hollow, resigned. "They never do." I spent the rest of the day in the kitchen, trying to process what I'd seen. The remaining guests returned at dusk, exhausted and shaken. Still no sign of Miller. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the lodge settle around me. Around 3 a.m, I heard the door again, slamming. 3 times, the same rhythm as the night before. I got up and looked out the window. The waiting room's door was swinging open and shut in a wind that didn't exist. The trees around it stood perfectly still. Then I saw movement, a figure walking slowly across the clearing toward the cabin. Dressed in dark clothes, shoulders hunched. Miller. I pressed my face against the glass, trying to see clearly. He reached the cabin and stood in the doorway for a moment, silhouetted against the darkness inside. Then he stepped forward and disappeared. The door swung shut. In the morning, I went to the cabin again. Dale tried to stop me, but I pushed past him and opened the door. The boots were gone. In their place was a jacket. Miller's jacket. Folded neatly on the floor, arranged as if he'd shrugged it off and walked away. The search and rescue team arrived that afternoon. They spent 2 days combing the area, using dogs and helicopters and thermal imaging. They found nothing. No tracks, no scent trail, no sign Miller had ever been there. The official report listed him as missing, presumed lost in the wilderness. An accident. A tragedy. I quit on the 4th day, told the agency I was sick, couldn't continue. Dale didn't try to convince me to stay, just drove me back to the float plane dock in silence. As we pulled away from the lodge, I looked back one last time. The waiting room sat at the edge of the clearing, door closed, windows dark. And I knew with a certainty that made my skin crawl that it was occupied now, that Miller was in there somehow, waiting, like all the others who'd wandered off and never come back. 3 weeks later, I got a call from the agency. They needed a cook at Ridgeline again. One of the guests had gone missing during a hunt. The guides were requesting someone experienced, someone who knew the lodge. His name was Foster, the recruiter said. Wandered off 2 nights ago, They found his hat this morning in some cabin on the property." I hung up without answering. I don't work remote contracts anymore. Don't go near hunting lodges or fly-in camps or anywhere too far from cell service. Because I understand now what the waiting room is. It's not a place where people wait to be found. It's a place where the forest keeps what it takes, a collection, a gallery of the lost. And once your things appear inside, arranged just so, it means you're not missing anymore. You're part of something else, something patient and old that lives in the spaces between the trees, something that's always waiting for the next person to wander off alone. My name is Peter Cantrell, and I was 17 when my father took me on my first hunt at the Blackthorn Lodge in upstate New York. It was supposed to be a rite of passage. 3 days in the Adirondacks, just the two of us, tracking white-tailed deer through forests his grandfather had hunted 50 years before. My father talked about it for months leading up to the trip, his voice taking on a quality I rarely heard, something close to reverence. "The Blackthorn's different," he told me while we packed the truck. "It's old school, no electricity after 9, no phones. You hunt at dawn, you're back by dusk, and you respect the land." "Sounds intense," I said. "It is." He paused, folding a flannel shirt. "Your grandfather brought me there when I was your age, said it taught him more about hunting than any other place, about patience, about listening." We arrived on a Friday afternoon in late October. The lodge was set back from a narrow dirt road, a long, low building made of dark timber with a stone foundation and shuttered windows. Smoke rose from a chimney at the far end, and the smell of burning wood mixed with the scent of wet leaves. An older man met us on the porch. 60-something, lean, with a gray beard and eyes that didn't quite meet yours when he spoke. "Cantrell," he said, shaking my father's hand. "Good to see you back. Been a while." 10 years, my father said. "This is my son, Peter." The man looked at me briefly, then nodded. "Name's Boone. I run the place. Your cabin's the third one down. Dinner's at 6. The cabin was small and cold, with bunk beds, a wood stove, and a single window facing the forest. My father started a fire while I unpacked our gear, laying out rifles, ammunition, our orange vests and wool layers. "We'll scout the trails tomorrow morning," he said, feeding kindling into the stove. "There's a ridge about 2 miles north. Good sight lines. Your grandfather took a 10-pointer there in '74. "Did you ever get anything here?" I asked. He was quiet for a moment, focused on the fire. "Once. Long time ago." Something in his tone made me glance over, but his expression was unreadable. Dinner was served in the main lodge, 8 hunters total, plus Boone. We ate venison stew and cornbread at a long table lit by kerosene lamps. The conversation was muted, practical. Weather patterns, trail conditions, where deer had been spotted. After the meal, Boone stood and cleared his throat. "A reminder for those who haven't been here before," he said, looking directly at me. "The hunt ends at dusk. You hear the horn, you come back. No exceptions. And if you hear your name called in the woods, you don't answer, you don't follow. You mark your position and you return to the lodge." One of the older hunters chuckled softly. "Still telling that story, Boone?" Boone didn't smile. "It's not a story." The room fell quiet. My father stared at his plate. We returned to the cabin and went to bed early. I lay in the top bunk, listening to the wind move through the trees, and tried not to think about Boone's words. "If you hear your name called, you don't answer." We woke before dawn. My father moved quietly in the darkness, dressing in layers, checking his rifle with practiced efficiency. I followed his lead, my hands clumsy with cold and nerves. Outside, the forest was still black, the sky just beginning to pale at the edges. Other hunters were emerging from their cabins, their headlamps cutting through the darkness like fireflies. Boone stood near the trailhead, holding a brass horn. "Dawn's at 6:42, he called. "Dusk is 5:58. You hear the horn at 5:30. That's your warning. 30 minutes to get back." My father nodded and started up the trail. I followed, my boots crunching on frost-covered leaves. We hiked for over an hour, moving slowly, stopping frequently to listen. The forest woke around us, birds calling, branches creaking, the distant sound of something moving through underbrush. By 8, we'd reached the ridge. My father positioned us behind a fallen log with a clear view of a game trail below. We settled in to wait, our breath misting in the cold air. Hunting, I learned, is mostly silence. You sit, you watch. You become part of the landscape until the world forgets you're there. Around 10, I saw movement. A doe picking her way through the trees, cautious and alert. My father touched my arm, signaling me to stay still. We watched her for 5 minutes until she moved out of sight. The day passed slowly. We ate jerky and drank water from a thermos. My legs cramped. My nose went numb. But my father seemed content, almost peaceful, in a way I rarely saw him. Around 3, as the light began to shift, I heard it. "Peter." Faint, distant, coming from somewhere deeper in the forest. I turned, scanning the trees. My father was focused on the trail below, unmoving. Peter. Closer now, almost familiar. I stood slowly, trying to locate the source. The voice sounded like my father's, but softer. Younger, maybe. "Dad," I whispered. "Did you call me?" He looked up sharply. "No, why?" "I thought I heard—" "Sit down." His voice was hard. "Don't listen to it." "To what?" He grabbed my arm and pulled me back down behind the log. His face was pale, tense in a way I'd never seen. "The echo," he said quietly. "It's an echo hunt. That's what they call it here." "I don't understand." He looked out at the forest, his jaw tight. "This land remembers. Everyone who's hunted here, everyone who's walked these trails. It records them somehow. Their voices, their movements, and sometimes it plays them back." I stared at him. "That's not possible." "I heard my grandfather here," he said, 10 years ago, calling my name from a section of forest he used to hunt. He'd been dead for 5 years. The voice came again. "Peter, come here. I need you to see something." It was clearer now, definitely my father's voice. But he was sitting right next to me, his lips pressed together, not speaking. "Don't answer," he said. "Don't acknowledge it. It's testing." "Testing what?" "Whether you'll follow." We sat in tense silence for another hour. The voice came twice more, each time from a different direction. Once it sounded like my mother, once like my younger sister. Each time, my father gripped my arm tighter, holding me in place. At 5:30, the horn sounded from the direction of the lodge, low and mournful, echoing through the trees. "Time to go," my father said, standing quickly. "Stay close. Don't stop. Don't look back." We moved down the trail faster than we'd climbed it, my father setting a pace that was just short of running. Around us, the forest had changed. The light was dimmer, the shadows thicker. The trees seemed closer together, and everywhere I heard voices, calling names I didn't recognize, laughing, whispering. Some sounded recent. Others had a strange quality, like old recordings played through broken speakers. "Peter, wait up." My father's voice again, from behind us this time. I started to turn, but my father grabbed my shoulder. "Keep moving." "But what if—" "It's not me. I'm right here. Keep moving." We stumbled down the trail as the light failed. My lungs burned. My legs felt like lead. Behind us, the voices multiplied, overlapping, creating a chorus of stolen words. The lodge appeared through the trees, warm light spilling from the windows. We burst into the clearing, and my father didn't slow until we'd crossed the threshold into the main building. Inside, other hunters were gathered around the fire, faces flushed, breathing hard. All of them had returned, all except one, "Where's Marsh?" Boone asked, doing a quick count. Nobody answered. Boone looked at the clock on the wall. 6:15. He walked to the door and stepped onto the porch, raising the horn to his lips. He blew 3 long blasts, the sound cutting through the dusk. We waited. At 6:30, Boone came back inside and closed the door. "He's not coming back tonight," he said quietly. "We have to search," one of the hunters said. A younger man, maybe 30, his voice rising. "He might be hurt, might have fallen." "We search at dawn," Boone said. "Not before." "That's insane. He could die out there." Boone met his eyes. "If he's still himself, he'll survive until morning. If he's not, then there's nothing we can do." The room fell silent. We ate dinner in shifts, taking turns watching the windows. Nobody spoke much. Around 8, someone thought they saw a light moving in the forest. Boone checked, then shook his head. "Reflection," he said, but he didn't sound certain. At 9, the generator shut off as promised. We lit candles and kerosene lamps and sat in the flickering darkness, listening. Around 10, we heard footsteps on the porch. Everyone froze. Boone stood slowly and moved to the door. "Marsh?" he called. "It's me," a voice answered. Marsh's voice. "I got turned around. Can you let me in?" Boone looked back at us, his face grim. "Where'd you hunt today?" A pause. "North Ridge, by the creek." "What did you see?" Another pause, longer this time. "A 10-pointer. Didn't get a shot." Boone's hand hovered over the doorknob. "What's your daughter's name?" Silence. Then slowly, "Sarah." Boone opened the door. Marsh stood on the porch, rifle slung over his shoulder, his face pale in the lamplight. He looked exhausted but unhurt. "Sorry," he said, stepping inside. "Lost track of time. Got confused on the trails." But something was wrong. I couldn't name it, but I felt it. The way he moved was slightly off. The way his eyes didn't quite focus on anyone directly. My father felt it too. I saw him tense, his hand moving subtly toward the knife on his belt. Marsh sat at the table and accepted a bowl of stew. He ate mechanically, answering questions in brief, clipped sentences. Yes, he was fine. No, he hadn't been hurt, just disoriented. But he never looked at Boone, never made eye contact with anyone. And when he spoke, there was an echo. Faint, barely perceptible. Like his words were being repeated a fraction of a second later by something else. Around midnight, my father pulled me aside. "We're leaving," he whispered. "First light. Pack your things quietly." "What about Marsh?" "That's not Marsh anymore." We returned to our cabin. My father wedged a chair under the door and told me to sleep with my boots on. I didn't sleep. I lay in the bunk, listening to footsteps outside, circling the cabin, slow and deliberate. Once, I heard my father's voice calling softly from just beyond the window. "Peter, are you awake? Come outside. I want to show you something." But my father was in the bunk below me. I could hear him breathing, awake and tense. At dawn, we packed quickly and left without breakfast. Boone didn't try to stop us, just watched from the porch as we loaded the truck. "Your grandfather understood," he called as we pulled away. "That's why he kept coming back. Once you hear it, once the forest has your voice, you're connected. It'll call you, and eventually, you'll answer." We drove in silence for an hour. Finally, I asked the question I'd been holding. "Did you hear yourself out there? 10 years ago?" My father's hands tightened on the wheel. "Yes." "What did it say?" "It said I should stay, that I belonged there, that the forest had been waiting for me since I was a boy." He glanced at me. "Your grandfather disappeared 3 years after he stopped going to Blackthorn. They found him in the woods behind our house. He'd walked into the trees and never came back. You think?" "I think he heard his echo one last time, and he finally followed it. We never went back to Blackthorn Lodge. My father sold his rifles the following year and never hunted again. But sometimes late at night, I hear it, faint and distant, like it's traveling across years and miles. My own voice, calling from somewhere in the dark, saying my name, telling me to come back, telling me the hunt isn't over. And the worst part is, I want to answer. Some part of me wants to go back to those woods and find out what's waiting, what's been calling my name in my father's voice, in my voice, in the voices of everyone who ever walked those trails, because the echo hunt never really ends. Once the forest has you, once it's learned your voice, you're part of the collection. And eventually, everyone goes back to where they're called. Eventually, we all answer.